The snowman stood defiant, its frozen stare daring the raging HOA president to strike again. But when Karen's car suddenly veered out of control, the steel core hidden within the snowy sentinel revealed a shocking secret. One that would shake the quiet suburban community to its very foundations. The first snowfall of the winter blanketed the neighborhood in a pristine coat of white, transforming the quaint suburban sprawl into a picturesque winter wonderland. But for James, the sight of the freshly fallen snow only filled him with dread. He knew it was only a matter of time before his nemesis, the tyrannical HOA president Karen, would descend upon his yard like a shrieking banshee. As if on cue, James heard the familiar sound of Karen's luxury SUV rumbling down the street. Peering through the curtains, he watched with a mixture of anger and resignation as the imposing woman stormed out of her vehicle, her manicured nails clenched into razor-sharp talons. That monstrosity has to go," Karen bellowed, stomping across the pristine snow and pointing an accusatory finger at the towering snowman James had lovingly crafted the previous night. James steeled himself, squaring his shoulders as he stepped outside to confront the irate woman. "Karen, the snowman is well within the HOA guidelines. There's nothing wrong with it." "Wrong?" Karen's eyes bulged, the veins in her neck throbbing. "It's an eyesore. It doesn't fit the aesthetic. I demand you remove it immediately." "No," James replied, his voice firm. "I worked hard on that snowman, and I'm not taking it down just because you don't like it." Karen's face contorted with rage, and for a moment, James feared she might lunge at him. But instead, she spun on her heel and stormed back to her car, her heels crunching through the snow. "This isn't over, James," she screeched. "I'll be back, and when I am, that thing better be gone." As Karen's SUV peeled out of the driveway, James let out a shaky breath, his heart pounding in his chest. He knew the battle had only just begun. Over the next few days, Karen's campaign of terror escalated. She would return at all hours, hurling insults and threats at the snowman, even going so far as to try and knock it down with her car. But each time, the sturdy snowman stood firm, its icy exterior concealing a secret core of steel that James had meticulously crafted. One particularly frigid morning, James was startled awake by the sound of crunching snow and Karen's shrill voice. Peering out the window, he watched in horror as she surrounded the snowman with a can of gasoline, her eyes gleaming with malicious intent. "This ends today, James," she shrieked, striking a match and tossing it at the snowman. But as the flames licked at the snow, a sudden, unexpected thing happened. The snowman's midsection buckled, and the flaming gasoline spilled outward, engulfing Karen's SUV in a roaring inferno. James watched, stunned, as Karen stumbled away from the blazing car, her designer coat singed and her hair singed. She stared at the snowman, her face a mask of pure terror, before turning and fleeing down the street, her shrieks of anguish echoing in the frosty air. In the aftermath, as the fire department extinguished the smoldering wreckage of Karen's SUV, James approached the snowman, his heart pounding with a strange mixture of fear and relief. The steel core he had placed inside the snowman's midsection had saved the day, but at what cost? As he stared at the snowman, its icy features seemingly frozen in a triumphant grin, James couldn't help but wonder what other secrets it might be hiding. The scorched remains of Karen's SUV were still smoldering when the police arrived, their sirens wailing through the crisp winter air. James watched anxiously from his porch as the officers swarmed the scene, their faces a mix of confusion and concern. As the investigators began cataloging the damage, James couldn't help but feel a twinge of guilt. He knew the steel core he had carefully crafted into the snowman was the cause of the sudden and explosive demise of Karen's prized vehicle. But he also couldn't shake the sense of satisfaction that came from seeing the tyrannical HOA president finally face the consequences of her relentless campaign against his creation. When the police finally approached him, James steeled himself, ready to explain his actions. But to his surprise, The officers seemed more interested in the snowman itself than in any potential wrongdoing on his part. "Sir, can you tell us about this snowman?" the lead investigator asked, his brow furrowed in curiosity. James hesitated, unsure of how much to reveal. "It's, just a snowman I built a few days ago. Nothing special about it." The officer eyed him skeptically. "Really? Because it seems to have some sort of metal core that caused significant damage to Mrs. Wilson's vehicle." Sighing, James decided there was no use in trying to hide the truth. "Look, I reinforced the snowman with a steel frame because I knew Karen was going to keep coming after it. I never intended for anyone to get hurt, but I couldn't just let her destroy something I put so much work into." The investigator nodded, his expression softening slightly. "I understand the desire to protect your property, but you have to admit, concealing a dangerous metal structure inside a harmless-looking snowman is a bit unconventional." James shrugged. "I did what I had to do to stand up to that woman. She's been terrorizing the entire neighborhood for years, and no one has ever had the guts to stand up to her. I guess I just reached my breaking point." The officer contemplated this for a moment, then glanced back at the smoldering wreckage of Karen's SUV. "Well, that's certainly an interesting approach. I'll have to consult with the district attorney on how to proceed, but for now, I'd advise you to keep that snowman under close watch. Karen's not going to take this lying down." As the police officers continued their investigation, James felt a mix of relief and trepidation. While he was glad to have finally put a stop to Karen's relentless harassment, he knew that the fallout from this incident was far from over. Later that evening, as James stared out at the snowman, now illuminated by the glow of the setting sun, he couldn't help but wonder what other surprises it might have in store. Whatever happened next, he was determined to protect his creation and his newfound sense of empowerment at all costs. In the days following the fiery demise of Karen's SUV, the quiet suburban neighborhood was abuzz with whispers and speculation. The story of the vengeful snowman and its steel-reinforced core had spread like wildfire, captivating the imaginations of the residents who had long endured Karen's tyrannical reign. James, meanwhile, found himself at the center of the maelstrom, fueling an endless stream of questions and curious glances from his neighbors. While some praised him for standing up to the HOA president, others eyed him with a mix of fear and unease, unsure of what other surprises the seemingly innocent snowman might have in store. As the police investigation continued, Karen remained conspicuously absent from the neighborhood. James suspected she was licking her wounds, plotting her next move, and the anticipation of her inevitable return only heightened the tension that had taken hold of the community. One evening, as James was tending to the snowman, making sure it was still standing tall and proud, he heard the familiar rumble of a vehicle approaching. Turning, he watched in dread as a sleek, black sedan pulled into his driveway, its tinted windows obscuring the identity of the driver. The car door swung open, and James felt his heart drop as a tall, slender figure emerged, her designer heels crunching through the snow. It was Karen, her face a mask of fury, as she stalked towards him. "You!" she spat, her manicured finger pointed accusingly at the snowman. That thing has cost me everything." James stood his ground, his arms crossed defiantly over his chest. "I warned you to leave it alone, Karen. This is all your own doing." "My doing?" Karen's voice rose to a shrill shriek. "You rigged that snowman to destroy my car. You'll pay for this, James. I'll make sure of it." "I don't know what you're talking about," James lied, his heart pounding in his chest. "I built a snowman, and you chose to attack it. The consequences of your actions are your own." Karen's eyes narrowed, and for a moment, James thought she might lunge at him. But instead, she took a step back, her lips curling into a wicked grin. "Oh, you think you're so clever, don't you, James?" she hissed. "Well, let me tell you something. This isn't over. Not by a long shot." With that, Karen spun on her heel and stalked back to her car, the engine roaring to life as she peeled out of the driveway, the tires kicking up a spray of snow in her wake. James watched her go, his muscles tense with apprehension. He knew that Karen was not the kind of person to let this go, and he had a feeling that she was already plotting her next move. As the night wore on, James found himself unable to sleep, his mind racing with possible scenarios of how Karen might retaliate. He had stood up to her, and in doing so, had unleashed a force that he was no longer sure he could control. With a deep sigh, he turned his gaze back to the snowman, its icy features glimmering in the moonlight. Whatever happened next, he knew that he would have to be ready, and that the steel-reinforced creation might be his only hope of survival. The following days were marked by a tense silence that had settled over the neighborhood. James found himself constantly on edge, his eyes scanning the streets for any sign of Karen's return. The once jovial community had become a powder keg, with residents whispering behind closed doors and casting wary glances at the imposing snowman that stood sentinel in James' yard. As the days stretched into weeks, James began to wonder if perhaps Karen had finally conceded defeat. But just as he was starting to let his guard down, the unthinkable happened. It was a bitterly cold night when James was jolted awake by the sound of shattering glass. Rushing to the window, he peered out to see a dark figure darting across his lawn, disappearing into the shadows. Trembling, he reached for the baseball bat he kept by his bedside and cautiously made his way downstairs. Flicking on the porch light, James gasped at the sight that greeted him. The snowman, his creation that had stood so tall and proud, lay in a heap of snow and broken branches, its once impenetrable exterior shattered beyond recognition. Fury surged through James' veins as he realized what had happened. Karen, in a fit of vengeful rage, had struck again, this time resorting to outright vandalism to destroy the symbol of his defiance. Gripping the bat tightly, James scanned the yard, his eyes searching for any sign of the culprit. But the neighborhood was eerily silent, save for the faint sound of the wind rustling through the trees. Kneeling beside the decimated snowman, James felt a wave of devastation wash over him. All his hard work, all the time and effort he had poured into crafting this icy creation, had been reduced to a pile of frozen debris. But as he examined the remains, a glimmer of hope ignited within him. The steel core, the very heart of the snowman, remained intact, its metallic gleam reflecting the porch light. Inspired, James began to work quickly, shoveling away the snow and carefully reassembling the shattered pieces. He knew that if he could just get the snowman back on its feet, it would be a testament to his refusal to back down in the face of Karen's relentless campaign. As the first rays of dawn began to creep over the horizon, James stepped back, surveying his handiwork. The snowman, though battered and bruised, stood once more, its icy features seemingly etched with a newfound determination. James felt a surge of pride swell within him. He had won this round, and he knew that Karen would not be pleased. With a steely resolve, he vowed to do whatever it took to protect his creation, and to finally put an end to the HOA president's reign of terror. As he headed back inside, James couldn't help but wonder what other surprises the snowman might have in store. Whatever happened next, he was ready to face it head-on, armed with the knowledge that his icy sentinel was more than just a simple winter decoration. In the aftermath of the snowman's brutal attack, the neighborhood was in a state of uproar. Word of Karen's latest act of vandalism had spread like wildfire, and the residents, once content to turn a blind eye to her antics, were now furious. James, however, remained steadfast, his determination to protect his creation only growing stronger. He knew that Karen would not rest until the snowman was gone, and he was determined to prove that he would not be cowed by her bullying tactics. As the residents gathered in the community center for an emergency HOA meeting, the tension in the air was palpable. Karen, her designer outfit impeccable as always, strode to the front of the room, her every movement dripping with an air of superiority. "Ladies and gentlemen," she began, her voice saccharine sweet, "I'm sure you've all heard about that incident at James' house. I want to assure you all that the perpetrator has been dealt with and that the neighborhood's safety is our top priority." A murmur of discontent rippled through the crowd, and James could see the skepticism written across the faces of his neighbors. "However," Karen continued, her eyes narrowing, "there is the matter of that snowman. As you all know, it is a clear violation of our HOA guidelines, and I simply cannot allow it to remain in our community." James stepped forward, his heart pounding in his chest. "That's not true, Karen, and you know it. The snowman is well within the guidelines, and you have no right to demand its removal." Karen's lips curled into a sneer. "Oh, I do, James. As the president of this HOA, it is my duty to maintain the aesthetic integrity of our neighborhood. And that thing in your yard is an eyesore that simply cannot be tolerated." The crowd erupted into a chorus of protests, with several residents voicing their support for James and his snowman. Karen's face flushed with anger, and she raised her hand to silence the room. "Enough," she bellowed. "This matter is non-negotiable. The snowman must be removed, or there will be consequences." James stood his ground, his jaw set with determination. "I'm not taking it down, Karen. This is my property, and I have the right to enjoy it as I see fit." Karen's eyes narrowed, and for a moment, James thought he saw a glimmer of fear in their depths. "Very well, James, but don't say I didn't warn you." With that, she turned and strode out of the room, her heels clicking against the linoleum floor. The residents erupted into a cacophony of shouts and murmurs, but James barely heard them. As he made his way home, his mind raced with the implications of what had just transpired. Karen was clearly not going to back down, and he knew that he would have to be prepared for whatever retaliation she had in store. But as he approached his front yard and laid eyes on the snowman, standing tall and proud, a sense of resolve washed over him. This was his creation, his symbol of defiance, and he would do whatever it took to protect it. The tension in the neighborhood reached a fever pitch in the days following the heated HOA meeting. Karen, true to her word, had not backed down, and her campaign to have the snowman removed only intensified. James found himself the target of constant harassment, with Karen and her allies unleashing a barrage of complaints, threatening letters, and even a few late-night visits to his home. Despite the growing pressure, however, he remained resolute in his determination to protect his creation. One particularly frigid evening, as James was tending to the snowman, he heard the familiar rumble of an engine approaching. Peering out from behind the curtains, he watched in dread as Karen's sleek black sedan pulled into the driveway. Bracing himself for another confrontation, James stepped outside, his breath forming clouds in the chilly air. But to his surprise, Karen did not immediately launch into one of her trademark tirades. Instead, she approached him, her expression uncharacteristically somber. "James," she began, her voice oddly subdued, "I want to apologize for my behavior. I've been unreasonable, to say the least." James blinked, stunned by the unexpected turn of events. Oh, well, that's a first," he stammered. Karen sighed, her gaze darting away from his. "I know I've been a terror to this neighborhood, and I suppose I've finally met my match in you and your snowman. I can't help but admire your tenacity, even if I don't agree with your methods." James regarded her warily, unsure of where this conversation was headed. "Okay, so what are you saying? Are you going to leave the snowman alone?" Karen shook her head, a rueful smile tugging at the corners of her lips. "I'm afraid I can't do that, James. As much as I respect your determination, the snowman has to go. It's a matter of principle, you see." James felt his heart sink, the brief glimmer of hope extinguished. "So what, you're just going to keep harassing me until I give in?" "Not exactly," Karen replied, her expression suddenly hardening. "I'm willing to make you an offer, a compromise, if you will." Eyeing her skeptically, James crossed his arms over his chest. "I'm listening." "If you agree to remove the snowman yourself, I'll drop all the complaints and leave you alone," Karen said, her tone solemn. "But if you refuse, well," she let the words hang in the air, the threat implicit. James considered her proposal, his mind racing. On the one hand, he desperately wanted to be rid of Karen's constant interference. But the thought of surrendering his beloved creation filled him with a sense of dread. "And what happens if I don't accept your offer?" he asked, his voice low. Karen's lips curled into a twisted smile. "Let's just say the consequences won't be pretty. I have ways of making your life very, very difficult, James." The unspoken implication was clear. If he didn't comply, she would stop at nothing to destroy him and his snowman. Swallowing hard, James weighed his options. He knew that Karen was not one to make idle threats, and the thought of her unleashing her full fury upon him and his property was a terrifying prospect. With a heavy heart, he made his decision. "All right, Karen. I'll remove the snowman. But this is the last time you'll ever set foot on my property. Do you understand?" Karen's eyes gleamed with triumph, and she nodded. "Perfectly. I'll be in touch with the details." As she turned and headed back to her car, James felt a wave of defeat wash over him. He had fought so hard to protect his creation, only to be forced to surrender in the face of Karen's relentless campaign. But as he stared at the snowman, its icy features seeming to reflect his own sorrow, a spark of defiance ignited within him. He may have to remove the physical manifestation of his stand, but he would never truly give in to Karen's demands. With a newfound determination, James set to work, planning his next move, one that would ensure that the snowman's legacy lived on, long after it had been reduced to a mere pile of snow and ice. As the day of the snowman's removal drew near, James found himself consumed by a mixture of resignation and defiance. He had agreed to Karen's terms, but deep down, he knew that he could not simply let his creation be destroyed without a fight. In the days leading up to the deadline, James worked tirelessly, meticulously crafting a new and improved version of the snowman. This time, he incorporated even more reinforcements, ensuring that the steel core was not only stronger, but also more deeply embedded within the icy structure. He also took great care in designing the snowman's exterior, sculpting the features with a level of detail that far surpassed his previous efforts. The end result was a towering, imposing figure that seemed to radiate an aura of indestructibility. On the appointed day, James watched with a heavy heart as Karen's henchmen, a team of burly contractors she had hired for the job, descended upon his yard, armed with shovels and heavy equipment. They eyed the snowman warily, their expressions a mix of apprehension and determination. As they began to hack away at the snow, James couldn't help but hold his breath, his fingers crossed behind his back. To his surprise, the snowmen proved to be far more resilient than they had anticipated, withstanding their relentless assault with a stoic defiance. Frustrated, the contractors began to resort to more extreme measures, bringing in a backhoe to try and uproot the stubborn creation. But no matter how they tried, the snowman refused to budge, its steel core holding firm. Karen, watching from the sidelines, her face a mask of fury, finally stormed over to James, her eyes blazing. "What is the meaning of this, James?" she spat. "Why won't this thing come down?" James couldn't help but feel a twinge of satisfaction as he regarded her. "I told you, Karen, the snowman is within the HOA guidelines. You had no right to demand its removal." "But you agreed," Karen shrieked, her composure crumbling. "You said you'd take it down." "I said I'd remove the snowman," James replied, his voice calm and measured. "I never said I'd destroy it." Karen's face contorted with rage, and for a moment, James thought she might lunge at him. But instead, she spun on her heel and stormed back to the contractors, barking orders and gesticulating wildly. The battle raged on for hours, with the contractors employing ever more desperate tactics to bring down the snowman. But each time, the icy sentinel stood firm, its steel core proving to be an impenetrable barrier. As the sun began to set, the defeated contractors finally admitted defeat, their tools and equipment scattered around the yard. Karen, her composure shattered, glared at James, her eyes burning with undisguised hatred. "This isn't over, James," she hissed. "I'll find a way to destroy that thing if it's the last thing I do." James watched, unflinching, as she stalked back to her car and peeled out of the driveway, the tires spitting gravel in her wake. He knew that Karen would not give up easily, but for now, he had won. Turning his gaze back to the snowman, James couldn't help but feel a surge of pride. His creation had withstood the onslaught, and in doing so, had become a symbol of his own resilience and defiance. As the night settled in, James gazed up at the snowman, its icy features seeming to watch over the neighborhood with a stoic vigilance. He knew that the battle was far from over, but he was ready to face whatever Karen had in store, and to protect his beloved creation at all costs. In the aftermath of the failed attempt to remove the snowman, the neighborhood was abuzz with a mixture of awe, admiration, and speculation. James found himself the reluctant center of attention, with his once reclusive neighbors now seeking him out to offer their congratulations and express their support. Even the local media had caught wind of the story, with several news outlets reaching out to interview James and cover the ongoing feud between him and the HOA president, Karen. Though initially hesitant, James eventually agreed, seeing it as an opportunity to shine a spotlight on the tyrannical behavior that had plagued the community for far too long. As the interviews and news reports began to circulate, the public's perception of the snowman began to shift. What had once been seen as a simple winter decoration was now regarded as a symbol of resistance, a defiant act of rebellion against the overbearing control of the HOA. Karen, of course, was not pleased. She had hoped that the public humiliation of failing to remove the snowman would be enough to cow James into submission. But instead, it had only served to embolden him and rally the community to his cause. Desperate to regain control of the narrative, Karen launched a relentless campaign to discredit James and his creation. She bombarded the local news outlets with angry letters and scathing op-eds, painting the snowman as a dangerous and illegal structure that threatened the safety and aesthetic of the neighborhood. But her efforts were in vain. The more Karen ranted and raved, the more the public rallied behind James, with residents going so far as to hold vigils and rallies in defense of the icy sentinel. Realizing that her traditional tactics were no longer working, Karen resorted to more desperate measures. One bitterly cold night, as James was outside tending to the snowman, he was startled by the sudden roar of an engine and the screeching of tires. Whirling around, he watched in horror as Karen's car careened towards the snowman, its headlights blazing. But before the vehicle could make impact, the snowman's steel core sprang to life, sending a shower of sparks and debris flying in all directions. The car veered wildly, its tires skidding on the icy pavement, before finally slamming into a nearby tree with a sickening crunch. James watched, stunned, as Karen stumbled from the wreckage, her designer clothes in tatters and her face a mask of pure terror. As the police arrived on the scene, Karen tried desperately to spin the narrative, claiming that the snowman had somehow sabotaged her vehicle. But the evidence was clear. The steel core, the shattered glass, and the skid marks on the road all pointed to a clear act of self-defense. In the end, Karen's reckless actions had sealed her own downfall. The public outcry was deafening, with residents demanding her resignation from the HOA and even calling for criminal charges. The once powerful woman found herself stripped of her influence and authority, her reign of terror finally brought to an end. As for the snowman, it stood tall and proud, its icy features seemingly etched with a newfound sense of triumph. James knew that his creation had become more than just a winter decoration. It was a symbol of the power of resistance, a testament to the resilience of the human spirit. And as he gazed up at the icy sentinel, James couldn't help but feel a surge of gratitude and pride. The snowman had not only defended itself, but it had also helped to protect the community ensuring that the tyranny of the HOA would never again cast its shadow over their peaceful suburban oasis.